I always thought dementia was just a thief that steals memories, but I never knew it could open doors to things we were never meant to see. My beautiful wife, Nora, who is only 33, hasn't just started forgetting my name. She started talking about eyes living in our pipes. And the worst part, I started seeing them too. I'll start by saying that my wife Nora and I met when we were young. I was majoring in art history, and she was in her last year of study for her physics degree. It was only by happenstance that we met that day. It was the first class of a new semester, and she sat beside me in desert studies. I gave her only a quick glance, but I knew immediately that she was the most beautiful woman I had ever laid my eyes on. Short and thin with dark hair and pale skin, I had never seen anyone quite like her before. I thought her eyes sparkled like opals, and the way she walked caught my attention every time. I wasn't the only one though, and it seemed that many men took interest in her as well. Luckily for me, Nora liked art, which gave us something to talk about often. At first we studied together, then we went on dates, then we slept together. After a few overnights we made it official, and we have never departed from each other since. She graduated from New Mexico State at the end of that year and immediately took a job at a growing tech company, but it took me 2 more years to graduate. When I did, we celebrated, and I took a job at a local museum. For years we traveled together, cooked together, cried together, and laughed together, never stopping to think of our own mortality. Though not as consequential as death, we had never considered dementia as a risk to our well-being. Nora's family had no history of it, and neither did mine, which was just one of the reasons it was such a surprise. The other was that we first noticed it earlier this year, and she is only 33. We were up late one night, since we had just gotten back from a trip out of state earlier that day. It must have been around 10 or 11 at night, and the darkness outside our home was broken up only by distant city lights. I stood in the kitchen cooking, while Nora sat in the living room, watching a show I can't remember. What should I get my dad for his birthday? She asked. Thinking this question was odd, I set down the knife I was holding and looked at her from across the kitchen. What do you mean? I asked, knowing her father had passed away over 2 years prior. She looked at me, seemingly confused. At the end of the week, my dad's birthday, she said in a tone that told me I shouldn't have needed to ask. I sighed. Nora, I don't understand, I said, thinking this must have been some sort of strange joke. After that she seemed upset, and she sat quietly, leaving me alone to finish the cooking. Over dinner I asked her to explain what she meant, but Nora said she couldn't remember. That was the very first episode she had, and though harmless, it was concerning nonetheless. Days passed, then days turned to weeks, and after a while I think we had both forgotten about it. One day, however, I came home from a day at work that ran longer than usual, and my wife looked startled when I opened the door. I asked what was wrong, and Nora seemed to consider my question for a few moments before telling me that she thought someone had been in the bathroom. I waved it off, thinking nothing of it, but she was very insistent, which I found strange. Together we approached the bathroom door, which was closed, but on the other side was nobody, just as I thought. Oddly though, the tub was running softly, and the water that came from the faucet was dirty, nearly black. I looked at my wife with a concerned gaze, and I knew that she knew what I was thinking. Don't, she said. Nora, I started. I'm not crazy. She snapped, seeming to anticipate my concern. Sorry, Andrew, I know what I heard. I was taken aback, feeling both sad and worried for the woman I love so much. Okay, I said, willing to hear her explanation, and I hoped that it would be good enough to believe. Whoever was in here must have turned on the water, she claimed. I considered this for a few moments, but didn't believe it. Did she really expect me to believe that someone entered our home just to run a bath? Did you see this person? I asked. Then I frowned when I saw her face fall. No, she said quietly. We need to make you an appointment, I said after a few moments of silence. For a few seconds Nora didn't say anything. Then softly she said only 2 words. I know. Her lack of an argument struck me like a dagger. I knew then that something was wrong. The doctor said it was early onset, but unmistakably dementia. He said it wasn't uncommon, but not unheard of either. 30 was practically the earliest signs could show, and I cursed my wife's misfortune. It felt like my world was being pulled away from me, but I couldn't imagine how Nora felt. I drove her home, and we sat silently for a while, and I wondered what our lives would be like in 10 years. I took less time at work after that. At first, I was working 5 days, and it went down to 4. After a while longer, it went down to 3. Most days I would come home to find the same happy, interesting woman I'd always known with her full bank of memories on display. She was sharp and quick-witted, smart too, something which I had always liked. It was rare, but sometimes I would come home, and it would take her a few seconds longer to greet me, and her eyes would seem worried as if she was struggling to place my name. She forgot about Valentine's Day, but I came home with a full bouquet, and I felt bad that I had to remind her of her illness so harshly. She almost missed my birthday too, but I couldn't help but remind her. Nora cried that day. With all this said, I must state clearly that I have never been scared of my wife or her episodes. That was until recently anyway. It was about a week ago, last Tuesday to be exact. Work that day was the same as usual. Boring, uninteresting, but it drew on longer than usual. I had to stay an extra 2 hours, so by the time I made it home, Nora had already made dinner. We ate together as we sat on the couch watching a movie, and the evening went on the same as it did nearly every other day. When it got late, we retreated to bed, and it didn't take long for me to fall asleep with my arms around my closest comfort. I checked the alarm clock when I awoke to see that it was still in the very early hours of the morning. Fading blue moonlight filtered into the room through the wooden shutters on the window, leaving only a small view of the blue hour outdoors. Nora was no longer in my arms, and her side of the bed felt cold, obviously empty for some time. Thinking nothing of it, I sat up in bed and rested against the wall, waiting for her, thinking that she had only gotten up for a glass of water or to use the bathroom. I sat for over 10 minutes waiting for her, which I thought was odd, and I reasoned that she must have gotten up early to make breakfast, or that she may have had an early appointment with a doctor. But this behavior was strange. Nora had never struggled to sleep through the night before, and usually she awoke around noon when left alone. I got up from the bed and rose to my feet, worried that Nora may be suffering from one of her episodes. At this point, it has become a normal part of our lives, but we don't talk about that much. I opened the door to leave the room, and when I did, I could hear a faint rumbling sound from somewhere in the house. I stood for a moment trying to place the noise when I realized it was the bathtub. I calmed down, thinking Nora must have been up early to run a bath. I walked through our home in darkness since my wife had neglected to turn on the lights. I flicked light switches as I made my way to the bathroom, but I noticed something odd. From underneath the bathroom door, I could see that the bathroom light was off, but the tub was clearly running. Thinking this extremely odd, I opened the door to find that the room was empty, but both the tub and sink were running. Again, the water was dark, but I took out the plug from the tub's drain and turned off the water for both sources, irritated at my wife's behavior. Nora, I called from the bathroom while mopping up some of the water that had dripped onto the floor. After a few moments, I called again, though she still didn't respond. Angrily, I threw the towel in my hand to the ground and marched out into the living room. But quickly my anger turned to worry. "Nora, what are you doing?" I asked, though it was obvious. In the corner of the living room stood my wife, rigid as a board, staring at the wall mere inches away from her. Again, the lights were off, which was strange since I had turned them on only a few minutes prior. I didn't receive an answer from my wife, so I stepped forwards into the darkness. Worried and slightly scared, I reached out my hand, but something caught my attention. Now that the tub was off, I could hear my wife saying something quietly, but her mumbling grew louder as I came closer. "Nora, just come back to bed," I suggested, hoping I could somehow sway her out of this episode. I set my hand on her shoulder, and she jumped. I had never felt so distant before. Just for the eyes in the drain, the eyes in the drain. She mumbled, still refusing to face me. "Baby, I don't understand," I pleaded, which finally prompted her to look at me with a scared yet vacant expression. "In the water, they live in the drain. They live in the drain. They all see from the drain," she said in a tone that was more serious than before. I looked Nora in the eye, tremendously sad at her state. Why did this have to happen to her? Why did this have to happen to us? Our life was so simple before, and we were happy. I thought for a moment that I was angry at her. Then I realized I was only angry at her situation, our misfortune. I stared at her for a while, and after some time Nora stopped mumbling. I guided her to bed and called out of work for the day, then immediately got to work cleaning the bathroom. There was dirt left in the tub from the running water, so I took a dustpan and started to clear it. As I did, I heard noise from somewhere, though I couldn't place it. I perked my head up and listened. It was a soft sound, quiet yet audible when I held my body entirely still. I thought for a moment that it could have been coming from the drain, but I shook my head, refusing to believe Nora's nonsense. I finished cleaning and left the bathroom. After her episode, Nora and I laid in bed for a long time. She said she wasn't feeling well and that her head was hurting and her eyes strained in the light. I thought this was odd, and I offered to take her to the doctor, but she refused. I took great care of her, making sure her needs were met and that I supplied her with plenty of water, worried and sad all the while. I was greatly disturbed after the events of that morning, and though I tried hard not to show it, I knew she saw through me. Things came to a head after dinner when Nora abruptly stood from the couch and rushed into the bathroom. Sounds of retching and vomiting followed, and I felt sorry that she had to deal with a stomach bug too. I followed my wife into the bathroom and held her hair away from the toilet bowl as she spewed black vomit into it. It was sticky yet thin and nearly shiny. I had never seen anybody throw up so much before, and I started to worry that something was deeply wrong with her physical health, not just her mental. "Jesus, Nora, are you all right?" I asked after she finally finished and wiped the corners of her mouth with a towel. She didn't answer. Instead, she stared at the toilet bowl and the sticky vomit she had just spewed into it. I stared too. It was disgusting and not like anything I had seen before. "I'm okay," she said finally. "Are you sure?" I asked, worried for her still. "I'm just gonna wash up." With this, I left the bathroom and thought it was a good opportunity to put away the leftovers from dinner since I was no longer hungry and I knew Nora wouldn't be either. After that, I started on the dishes as Nora was taking a long time to wash up. When I finished, 30 minutes must have passed and my wife was still in the bathroom. Remembering what had happened that morning, I approached the door and knocked, but received no response. I waited a few moments, then knocked again, then took a step back from the door, waiting patiently for her to open it. I turned a curious eye to the bottom of the door, only to see the lights were off again and my heart dropped. Worried, I threw open the door to find Nora standing in front of the sink with her head held firmly in her hands. From underneath her fingers, she glared at me with a look that felt cold and empty, yet somehow dangerous. In the corner of the room, the tub was running yet again, albeit softly, only a trickle. "Nora," I gasped, truly scared of my wife. She slowly ran her palms over the front of her face, obscuring her visage as she stared at me still. No matter the position of her hands, Nora kept her cold gaze on me. Then, she started to make a noise. It was a whining, sharp yet low-pitched, as it came from deep within her throat. It started soft, and as I stood, scared, her groan grew louder. Then it ended. What replaced it was a soft, familiar voice saying, "In the drain, it needs to be washed. Washed in the tub, it needs to leave. Washed down the drain, the drain, the drain." I stood in the doorway, terrified, fearing not just for my wife, but her safety. I didn't know what to do or how to act, but I reached without thinking. My hands touched the faucet and turned it off, stopping the trickling water from it. When I did this, Nora's hands stopped moving and she stood entirely still. "It's okay, I'm here," I said, hoping that I could somehow pull her away from illness. I stepped forwards and set my hand on her shoulder in an attempt to comfort her, but I immediately regretted it. A piercing scream shot through the night air, stemming from my wife's mouth. She screamed as if she was in danger, as if she was dying. I'm not proud of it, but I recoiled from her, then shut the bathroom door as I walked into the kitchen. I clutched my chest and attempted to catch my breath as my wife's blood-curdling scream subsided. Dozens of thoughts raced across my mind, and I wasn't sure what to do. How could I fix this? Is this even fixable? A tear formed in the corner of my eye as I thought about my new reality. This is not the Nora I know. She stayed in the bathroom for quite some time, but after a while she left. She walked across the hall towards the bedroom and claimed she was tired when she saw me. I didn't protest that, and I let her go to bed alone for the first time in years. Her behavior was worrying, sickening, and frankly disturbing in a way I never thought I'd know. Above all, I was saddened that her episodes had become so bad. I thought about these things as I sat in the bathroom on the edge of the tub, sweeping dirt from in it. Nora had long fallen asleep, and as reluctant as I was to believe her story, I peered into the drain. It was empty, completely vacant of debris. What did she mean? I thought, refusing to believe my wife could be so wrong about this. An idea came to me, and I turned on the faucet. I returned my gaze to the drain, and when I did, I blinked in disbelief. What I am about to say is going to sound crazy, and I understand it's unbelievable. After a few moments with the water running, a large, white eye opened inside the drain, staring at me as I stared back. When I blinked again, it was gone. I couldn't sleep that night. I stayed seated in the kitchen, clutching a screwdriver and a hammer, my eyes fixed on the bathroom door. At exactly 3 a.m, the sound began. Not the sound of running water, but a deep, hollow suction, as if the house itself was trying to swallow something. I rushed to the bathroom and threw open the door. Nora was there, but she wasn't standing. She was prostrate over the drain, her face pressed tight against the opening. Black fluid was streaming from her ears and eyes, flowing directly down into the abyss. "Nora, get away from it." I screamed, tried to pull her back, but her body was heavy, as if roots had sprouted from her into the ground. She slowly raised her head, and there were no eyes, only glowing white voids that resembled that single eye I had seen in the drain. She spoke in a voice that wasn't hers, but a chorus of hundreds of overlapping voices. "Water doesn't wash bodies, Andrew. Water carries souls to where they belong. The eyes below, they are all of us." Suddenly, the walls of the house shook, and the main water pipe behind the wall burst. Black water gushed out, filling the room in seconds. In the midst of the chaos, I saw a massive, pale hand with unnaturally long fingers emerge from the small drain opening. A hand that couldn't possibly be human. It grabbed Nora's wrist and pulled with immense force. "Andrew, help me," Nora screamed, her real voice this time, the voice of the woman I loved. I threw myself onto the floor, grabbing her other hand, fighting that unknown entity. But the drain began to widen, the tiles shattering around me as the opening consumed everything. I looked inside the hole one last time and saw an entire world of black water, filled with thousands of white eyes watching us hungrily. I realized then the bitter truth. Nora wasn't suffering from dementia. She was being summoned. My strength failed, and Nora's fingers slipped from my grasp with a terrifying slowness. One final scream, then absolute silence. The water vanished, the floor dried, and the drain returned to its normal size, completely empty. They're calling my name now, and I've started to feel a thirst, a desperate thirst for the black water.